Welcome to the KnifeWife podcast. I'm Suze, married to Bob Terzuola. This podcast is about couples who live, love, and work together. It has little to do with knives. So today, joining us is Sally Rogers, who we've known since we lived in New Mexico. And she still lives in New Mexico. And she's married to Richard Rogers. And I think the most, interesting thing about them is they live out on a ranch. And I've been to the ranch. We've been to the ranch. And anyway, so Sally, say hi.
Hi.
Hi. And Sally and Bob and I and Richard were all getting over the Blade Show COVID. And so we're, we've all missed the last week. But anyway.
So we may sound a little hoarse.
Yeah. So Sally, one of the things I was going to ask you, just tell us a little bit about the ranch. I believe Richard makes knives to support his ranch habit. Is that correct?
It started out that way. Now I think the ranch is just more of a lifestyle where we live now. It's not, something that he's kind of retired a little bit more from the ranch life now. I mean, of course, because it's all encompassing, it's still around, but he does more knives now. And that's where
you have some help though. Who helps you in the ranch?
Now our son, who just turned 31, which is so hard for me to believe, he's our main help. And then he's got a wife. They've been married almost 5 years now.
Yeah, and you just had a second grandbaby, right?
And we just, the day before Father's Day, we had the second little one. And Big Brother McCoy is beside himself. He is so excited to be a big brother.
Oh, that's so nice. I saw the pictures. He looks so sweet. Just great.
Yeah, he's got these big chipmunk cheeks. And it's funny, when McCoy was a baby, he looked exactly, and to this day, he looks exactly like Taryn, our son. Mm-hmm. And this one seems to look a lot like Abby, the mama. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, the two grandsons, one looks like Bob's son, Dan, and the other one looks like the mother, Anna. So it's good to have one of each. Then they know where they came from. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about the ranch, how big it is, what you do on the ranch.
The ranch, what we call the main ranch, which is our headquarters where we're at, is 15 sections. One section is 640 acres. Some of it's deeded, some of it's Forest Service permit. Mm-hmm. We raise cattle, mainly like a Black Angus mix. Mm-hmm. And we've got a few horses that we don't necessarily ride them for fun. It's more just when we're working cattle anymore.
Yeah, they're working horses, right?
Yeah, a ranch, people have a romantic vision of a ranch, and it's actually a lot of work. It is so much work, and there is nothing at all romantic about it.
Yeah, I know. I had a 15-acre farm in Illinois, and I don't know. It's a lot of work. You don't make a lot of money. You have to really love it. I mean, you have to really want to do it, right?
Right. And anytime you have to rely on Mother Nature for your livelihood, it's really rough. Whether it's farming, ranching, especially living in the high desert, arid environment that we do, it's very, very hard. And you pray for rain all the time. In fact, I made a pillow years ago when I first moved to the ranch. I used to needlepoint, and I made a pillow that said, 11th commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's rain. Because every time you would look around to the north of us, they were always getting rain, and we'd be bone dry.
I know. I've seen the pictures, and if anybody, Richard Rogers Knives on Instagram, they have pictures of the ranch, and they have pictures of their oldest grandchild in his cowboy hat, his dinner plate belt buckle, and boots, and he literally is lassoing a calf and by the leg, which is pretty impressive. Anyway, when you met Richard, did you think you were going to move to a ranch?
No, never. That I always remind him, remember, I did not marry a rancher. No, he was off doing CPA work, and I was
Right.
getting ready to, go to London to work as an archaeologist, archivist at the British Museum. I was waiting for a grant to go through, and I thought that was what I was going to be looking forward to.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't pan out. And then his stepdad died, and it was a family ranch. His stepdad died just a little bit after college graduation, and his mom asked him, "Can you come for a couple of months?" Because there was it was a second family, and so she knew there was going to be some family drama with the estate. So she's like, "Richard, can you come and help me for a few months, and then you can get on with your lives." But that 3 months has now lasted 30-some years.
As has your marriage.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to be celebrating. Well, we've actually been, in September, we'll be together 41 years.
Wow.
Mazel tov.
So do you ever get sick of each other? Because, in my house, poof, there's sometimes we have a no-talk zone. It's just like, let me just go to my room for a while.
This COVID has taught me our vows in sickness and in health. It's that sickness part that you just have to remember, because Richard, he is such a stoic. He doesn't complain. He can be dying and he will not complain. Let him get a cold and oh my goodness, he becomes a whiner. I'm sorry, love, but you become a whiner.
That's all right. And I know.
I just sometimes want to take the pillow and just kind of put it a little bit on his face until.
But thank you for that quarter. Yeah. I always thank myself for the quarter turn where I don't do anything with. We have a lot of sharp knives, a lot of beautiful kitchen knives. They could have many uses. But
I think I'm going to dull them.
So Richard knows he's safe from knives, because to this day, even all this time living here, I cannot give a cow a shot. There's something about the needle or a knife or anything. I can't watch it on TV. I just don't like the skin actually being punctured. It just skeezes me out. So Richard's safe. I could never stab him.
Yeah, there we go. But that could be a deal breaker on the ranch. I mean, because I remember giving a lot of inoculations.
Oh yeah, everybody else. I do the other things. I can do all the other things. Just somebody else has to give the shots.
Yeah, yeah. And so your parents, when you moved to the ranch, did they come visit at the ranch?
Yeah, they were living in Wyoming, and I grew up in Wyoming. They were living in Wyoming and in Arizona later when they retired. And they would come and visit. But, I mean, we had never been around ranching and cows, horses, anything. It was a total new experience for me.
Yeah.
So,
and I was the first in my family to have a farm, let me tell you that. Nobody had a farm in suburban Chicago. And the first time my parents came to the farm, I had a pickup truck, and it was the kind, I don't know if you remember, that didn't have 4 doors yet, but it did have a back seat. And so you folded the front seat forward, and you climbed in between that little V into the back seat. And usually the kids were climbing there. But my mother, when we picked them up at the airport, she got in there, and she was quite the lady, And I said I had asked her to bring some shoes to go out to the barn in that she didn't care about. And of course, she brought brand new white Keds. And I thought, She said, well, I can wash them in the washing machine, Susie. I'm like, okay. So anyway, we pull up in the driveway, and they're all enamored. They see this, we go down this 1/4-mile road, and you have a long driveway where you live. And there's this Dutch red barn with a stone bottom, and, this federal farm house that's like sort of a colonial bluish gray. And, it was just picturesque. And so she was just trying to fit in or whatever. And my dad gets out of the front seat. My son gets out, and he pushes that seat forward, and he's used to jumping out. And then my mom, I push the driver's seat forward, and she puts both feet out at the same time. I don't know why. And she had very thin legs, like little bird legs. And she got stuck in that V, in that wedge. And so her feet were kicking, and she's saying to my father, whose name was Bob also, "Bob, help me." My father comes over, and he looks at her, and he just starts to laugh. I mean, he is doubled over laughing because she's in quite a position, and he's trying to pull on her, but she just gets wedged deeper and deeper into it. And so I said, "No." I said, "Somebody, I'm going to get in the back seat. I'll lift her up a little bit so she can get out of that." So that was her first time, although they loved the farm. My dad would bring a lawn chair out and sit with the chickens and watch them for hours. He called it chicken TV, which I borrowed that term later on. And my mother loved the goats. I don't know why she loved the goats. She wanted me to bring them in the house once, which I did. But they loved coming to the farm. And I was really surprised because they were not, my dad played golf, my mother played bridge. They were just not the farming kind of people. But they did. Anyway, so let's see. Where else do I want to go with this? I want to know.
Sally has a story about branding and castrating calves.
Okay.
And
I have
her daughter-in-law, as I recall correctly. Is that correct?
Your daughter-in-law,
Sally?
yeah.
A daughter-in-law,
Yes.
rather?
Before we started, she said, "When I tell this story, we sound like such rednecks, and we're really not." And they are really not. I mean, but it's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah. When my, about 6 years ago now, when my son first, I think it might have been like their second date, he brought Abby, who would later become our daughter-in-law. He brought her over, and she's a beautiful young lady. She really is. And she didn't grow up around ranching or anything either, but it was branding time. And at branding, you just have a crew in, and usually friends and family members, and they just come and help do different jobs. And so she came, and she was wearing jeans, but she was wearing a white T-shirt, which on a ranch, white does not go really well.
Yeah.
So we're
Let's
looking
go
at
with
her
my
thinking,
mother's white Keds. Yeah.
Doesn't
Right,
go well in the
exactly.
shop either, let me tell you.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking at her thinking, she's got makeup on, she's so pretty. We'll see what she does. And she, bless her heart, she just got in there. She did what anybody asked her to do. She never complained. She never sat there like, "Oh, I don't want to do this." She just did it all. Well, part of the job is when you have steers or when you have little bull calves, you don't want them all to be bulls. So you have to castrate them. And there are two methods. You can either castrate them by cutting with a knife, or they're called rubber bands, but they're special kind of bands that you can do.
Right.
This particular, and we've done both, and there's good on each side. This year, or that particular year, we did castrating with a knife. And so what they do is they have to go in and they have to cut in, and they end up with basically the testicles, and they just throw them away. That's what's called Rocky Mountain oysters.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have eaten them. I never have. I never will.
No,
but
not me either.
They just throw them out outside of, and so it just happened this one time. Abby was there holding the cow, flanking it, and my son was doing the cutting, and he just threw them up, but the wind came and it made them land right exactly on her breasts. And there's these two globs there, and she looks down, and of course her white shirt, she looks down, and we're looking at her thinking, "Oh my God, she's gonna freak out.
Yeah, she's gonna run out of this place. She'll be running down that long
we'll
road
never
of yours."
see her again. And my son kind of has this look like, "Oh my God," because he of course thought it was hilarious. He thought it was funny, but he didn't know her well enough. So she looks down, she looks up at him, and then she just started cracking up. She made this joke about it, and I don't remember the exact joke, but it was like, Richard and I looked at each other, and Richard's like, "She's the one.
Yeah.
She's definitely a keeper."
Yeah. Yeah. And I can hear him saying that.
Great story.
Oh, yeah.
That's such a great story. And the rest is history.
And the rest is history. And she has been like the perfect wife for him. They go out and do whatever needs to be done when it needs to be done. And she's a sweetheart.
Because he's a
good
farrier,
mama.
right?
No, Taryn used to be a farrier.
I
He
said
hasn't
Taryn
done
was
that.
a farrier. He doesn't do that,
Oh,
do that
Taryn.
anymore?
Yeah, Taryn. No, he doesn't do that. He does just our personal horse. It's really hard work. He
Yeah.
manages a ranch and takes care of our 2 ranches and stuff. So it's not, he didn't have time for it.
Okay. All right. Well, I remember he was young and doing that. It's nice to have a farrier in the house, though. I'll tell you that. It's like my sister-in-law,
Oh, yeah, that's
the
another.
doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So both Sally and Richard and Bob and I travel incredibly to go to different shows, and if we want a vacation, it's a whole nother trip. We usually tag them onto shows that we do. But Sally has been posting pictures on their Instagram page for I don't know how many years. Tell us about those pictures, about your hotel rooms.
For years, every single time we would check into a motel, regardless of whether it was an economy hotel, the hotel at the venue of the show, we would get the worst views. Every single time we get a view of the air conditioning units, the roofs, any kind of venting or walls. One time we had a wall like 3 feet in front of the window. It was just a plain brick wall, and it wasn't even like in New York City or anything where you might kind of expect it. But yeah, sometimes we get parking lots, but every single time there's air conditioning units.
Sometimes
So it's like
you
the
get
top
parking
of
lots?
the
Yes. Well, and it sort of tells me, get out of the room. This is sort of a message from the higher power.
Right, exactly. And
time to go.
It became this thing where it was like, we're not here for the view anyway, but it just became every time we would post a picture of it, another stellar view for the Rogers. And it became kind of like the shtick where within our Facebook group and friends and stuff, it was like they kind of come to expect it. Except for this very last time in Atlanta, we actually got a very nice view with trees, this promenade of trees, and it was pretty. But if I turned slightly, I still had the parking garage and parking lot. But at least I did have something other than. So I don't know whether it was a fluke or whether.
Well, I saw it the day before because you got there a day before we did. And so when we checked in our room, the first thing I do is open the curtains, and there was the same view as you guys had. And so I tagged you on Facebook, and I said, "We're in your room."
Yeah, you were just a few floors down from us.
Yeah,
but
yeah. People are like, "That's kind of creepy." I'm like, "It's just a joke."
A joke, right?
Anyway,
do you think it was a conspiracy? Could you envision all of these hotel managers calling one right after the other, saying, "Richard and Sally are on the way. Make sure you give them that room by the wall."
That was kind of got to be the thing where like, okay, are they looking at our name? And it's like, okay, Richard Rogers, give him this room.
Yep. Face nothing.
Right.
Okay. So, and then you mentioned something which I don't know this story, but about a Japanese man in an elevator, something. Where were you?
Right. Years ago, Richard used to be known for his multi-blade slip joints that he made because he did it at a time during the late 90s, early 2000s when it wasn't a thing. And slip joints, yes, have always been a thing, but he really got into the multi-blades. And at the time, people weren't really making those anymore and hadn't for a long, long time.
When I first saw his work, I saw a gentleman set he made that I don't know how many pieces it had, but it had a watch fob. It had, it was incredible.
Yeah, I think the most that he's ever made in one knife was 14 different implements.
Wow.
So yeah, he was known for this. Well, we were in a California show, and we were at a hotel. In the elevator, we had just gotten on, and there was a couple. There were 2 Japanese gentlemen that didn't speak. At that time, a lot of Japanese were coming over and buying knives, and they spoke very little English, mostly just Japanese. So they just kept staring at us and smiling and doing their bow. You know how they always bow. And so we'd smile back, and it was a long, slow elevator. And they just kept staring, and it gets very awkward. So they get off on their floor, and as the door opens, and right before it closes, they looked at Richard, bowed really deeply, and said, "You, Richard Rogers, you're famous in Japan.
Yes.
And Richard, and the door closes. Richard and I look at each other.
What an exit line.
Right.
Yeah. And we're like, what? So then we come home, and it was like, Richard was doing something, and he, you know how smirky sometimes Richard is. He said something to me, and I'm like, yeah, right. And he's like, you have to. I'm very famous. And I'm like, in Japan. This is America, buddy, not Japan.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I come to find out they bought for some big Japanese company. They bought blades, and because the Japanese really admire that multi-blade and Richard's
it's
quality
so hard
of
to do.
workmanship. Right, it's super complex.
So hard.
Super
That's very
complex.
true.
And
Very
Richard's.
I mean, I have a knife Richard made that has 2 blades, and I can't. I tried to show it on one of our home shows, and I couldn't even open and close it without cutting myself, let alone make it. So
Yeah, they're
serious
crazy.
skills.
There's a way, an order to open them. I have been able to do every one except for there's a 5-blade Stockman. That for the life of me, that 4th blade will always cut me.
Well, I feel better
I
now.
don't know. Yeah, it's just bizarre, but
He makes incredible knives. I mean, Bob makes nice knives, but Richard makes incredible knives. And then he's shifted his whole knife making because there isn't a big market for the kind of knives he was making. There's very few people can afford that kind of knife.
Yeah, the collector base were all older gentlemen who sadly have passed away or are no longer able to. Yeah. So there's now starting to be a slight rise in it again. But Richard totally did a pivot and went in a
no
totally
pun intended.
different yeah, right. and went in a different direction with his knives now.
And very well. And being a smart guy, I mean, I think it helps to be a CPA and pay attention to numbers, which, this is something I could never do. And, he can program those machines to use his CNC machine as an art tool.
Self-taught.
Yes, I know.
He had never been around a CNC machine. For some reason, his mind seems to work really well with it. And so
I think in our industry,
he took to it.
Don't you think there's a lot of Renaissance men who can do a lot of things? And women, but mostly men that can just do an incredible amount of things well.
Yeah, that's totally true.
Anyway, so Bob, do you have a ranch story to tell us? Do you have any farming stories to tell us?
Well, it's actually kind of a farming story, yeah. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer trainer in Puerto Rico, I was training a group going down to Guatemala for agricultural support. And we had one fellow, Edward, who was totally out of place. I think he just wanted to help save the world, but this agricultural group was probably the first one that was available to him. Anyway, we had an agricultural engineer named Dave Leonard, who was really very good, and he evaluated all of the trainees, taught them different things. And I remember when we were doing the orientation for this group, and they first arrived at camp in Puerto Rico, and they'd sit down and they'd ask questions, and they wanted to know, what is the food like in Guatemala? What is the health care? Do we have a good doctor? How do the Guatemalans feel about Americans and so forth? And Edward's principal concern at the time, being a city boy and having never been on a farm in his life, his principal concern was whether or not he should bring his tuxedo down because he was a 30-degree Mason and would often go to the Masons' meetings and wanted to know if they used tuxedos in Guatemala. And it was a subject which I really couldn't answer. I had no idea.
And they didn't just throw him out the door then, because you can't just throw somebody out of the Peace Corps, can you?
No, we didn't throw people out. What we did was we tried to set up training exercises that would help them deselect. We called it deselection.
Like seals ringing the bell, right?
Like seals ringing the bell, yeah. But he was obstinate, and he stuck with it. We took him out into the fields. We had cane fields from Bacardi rum nearby.
That's very good for a bunch of young Peace Corps volunteers to have
Well,
Bacardi rum that close,
yeah,
don't you think?
they didn't make the rum there. They just processed the cane.
Oh, well, never mind.
So these guys would get on buses, and poor Ed would go out there in his pressed pants and his loafers because he didn't bring any boots down, didn't have any jeans, didn't have any real work clothes. But he was sincere, and he was a good guy, and he was a nice guy. He was just totally incapable. At the end of the training session,
which is how long?
13 weeks. Mm-hmm. Now, he did speak Spanish because his father was Argentine, so that was one of the things in his favor.
Okay.
But at the end of the training session, Dave Leonard wrote on his evaluation form, Edward has the capacity for creating widespread famine in southern Guatemala. Keep him away from the programs. So, we tried to tell him this, and he just wanted so much to help. He really did. So I went down to Guatemala to do the site surveys to, where to place the different volunteers in the different small villages and campos and so forth. And in the city, I met a woman named Mariflor de Solis, who had started a program like Vista. Vista was like an urban, local Peace Corps. It wasn't international. It was for the city that it was founded in. We had them in the United States. They had them down there. It was kind of a community organizing situation. Yeah.
And at this time, Bob is way past college, and I am still in high school. And I heard about Vista because there was Youth for Vista or some program that they had at my high school, and you could sign up as a volunteer. And we went and taught reading to kids in inner city schools. And I always packed sandwiches because they learned better with my sandwiches, I found out. I don't know if my tutoring was great, but my sandwiches were. But anyway, that's where I heard about Vista. And until we talked about this, I'd forgotten all about it. So
well, it was a local Guatemala City type of organization, and they were trying to do good with community organization and help systems and so forth. And guess what Mariflor de Solis needed more than anything else?
A tuxedo.
No, she needed a secretary and an office manager. Mm. And we got Edward. I pulled him aside and I said, Edward, you're not going out into the field. You're going to stay in Guatemala City, and you're going to be a secretary and office manager. And his face just lit up. Thank God. He actually turned out to be a good volunteer, worked very well. And we found out that he was able to go to his Masonic meetings, and he finally did get use of his tuxedo, which he did bring down to Guatemala.
Wow. Having been there, it's hard to believe I've never seen anyone in a tuxedo. I was at a wedding there, and I didn't even see a tuxedo. Anyway, okay, well, that's a great story. I love that story. And we're probably going to wrap this up soon. I just would like a little advice from Sally for other couples who are or partners who work together. I asked you, what's the one thing you would tell couples who are new or running a business together?
Because we worked together as when Richard was a CPA, I worked with him then as receptionist and did some simpler tax returns and all. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, with the knife business and on the ranch, I think the most important thing is to find your own strengths and play to those. Don't necessarily overlap or think that you have to do more than you have to, because you all have your own thing, and it's best to let each other do it. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a lot easier and a lot more gets done. And also just to have a sense of humor with stuff. Just don't take everything so seriously, because when it's your own business, when you're self-employed, there's a tendency to just concentrate on the business of it, what needs to be done, whether it's the taxes, whether it's the bill paying, all that. Mm-hmm. You need to just realize, you can still have fun with this. You can still just relax into it. and enjoy each other rather than always being like, trying to nag at each other to get stuff done.
Right, and you don't want to compete. And it's
No.
important to stay in any job where you work with someone to stay in your own lane.
Yeah.
And I would say to Bob at the beginning, please don't micromanage me. I don't do well with that at all. And he's like, what the hell is micromanaging? I'm not. Yeah, you are.
Like Richard always says when people ask him, he's like, no, I just make the knives. Sally does everything else. And that's a system that works for us. And it does, because I'm much more on the social side than Richard is. And there's no way in heck I would ever be able to make a knife like he does. So
correct.
Why should we step on each other's toes?
Yeah, I agree.
It's a division of responsibilities. And it seems to work pretty well.
All right. Well,
it's worked
thank you for being with
41
us.
years.
Yeah, it has.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and their website address is richardrogersknives.com. And on Instagram, they're Richard Rogers Knives. And what can I say? You'll be delighted by the diversity in their lives. It's amazing. One day they're ranching, the next day he's making these incredible complex knives. And Sally, I have to say, as many knife wives are, is the face of the company. She's working the table.
Yep.
I mean, Richard's there, but everybody knows Sally. Thanks for listening. If you like what you're hearing, please share this with a friend and subscribe where you listen to podcasts. Please support our efforts through Patreon at TheKnifeWife, and for all Terzawola goodness, go to terzawola.net. And remember, if you're not laughing, you're not living. Comments and questions can be made on Instagram at The KnifeWife Podcast or our Facebook group, The KnifeWife Podcast. And if you're a couple who work together and would like to be on our podcast, tell us about yourself with an email at eccentricsues.com or terzawola.net.